I was 75 the day my son told me I was disturbing his privacy. Imagine hearing that from the very child you once carried on your back to school, the boy whose shoes you polished before every exam, the man you thought would protect you when you grew old. My name is Margaret Collins, and this house, every brick, every nail, every inch of it, was built by my hands. When my husband Richard passed away 40 years ago, I was left with a small insurance check, a broken heart, and a baby barely a year old. I worked day and night, cooking in a local diner by morning and sewing for neighbors by night, to make sure Ethan never felt the kind of hunger I did. I laid the foundation for this home myself, watched it rise from dirt and sweat, and filled it with warmth, laughter, and the scent of apple pies cooling by the window. For years, Ethan and I were inseparable. He was a quiet boy, gentle and grateful. When he went off to college, I sold my gold wedding bangles to pay his tuition. "Someday, Mom," he said, hugging me tightly, "I'll buy you a house bigger than this one." I smiled, not knowing the irony those words would one day hold. Then came Sophie, beautiful, confident, and sharp-tongued in the way young people often are. Ethan met her at work and brought her home one Christmas. I welcomed her with open arms, treating her like the daughter I never had. When they married, I told them, "Stay here. This is your home too." They agreed, and I moved from the master bedroom to the small guest room down the hall, so they could have more space. For the first few months, everything felt perfect. Sophie cooked sometimes, and Ethan still kissed my forehead every morning before work. But slowly, the warmth began to fade. Doors started closing behind me. Conversations went silent when I entered the room. Sophie began sighing whenever I spoke at the dinner table, rolling her eyes when Ethan wasn't looking. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I offered too much advice. But it grew worse. One evening, Sophie told me bluntly, "We need privacy, Margaret. It's not healthy for a young couple to have someone always around." I was stunned. Someone? I had lived in that house before she even met my son. I smiled weakly and said, "Of course, dear." But her words cut deep. Ethan changed too. He started staying late at work, avoiding meals with me. When I asked if I'd done something wrong, he simply said, "Sophie just wants space, Mom. Don't take it personally." But how could I not? The house I had once filled with laughter now echoed with cold silence. I spent my days alone, dusting the same shelves and pretending I didn't hear them whispering behind closed doors. Sometimes at night, I would walk down the hallway and stop outside their room, hearing the faint sound of laughter. Hers, not his. My heart would ache with memories of the little boy who used to run to me when he was scared of thunder. Then one morning, everything changed. Ethan stood in the kitchen, his face hard, his voice flat. "Mom," he said, "this isn't working. Sophie and I need our privacy. We've decided to take legal steps to protect it." I froze. "Legal steps? What do you mean?" He looked away. "You'll get the papers soon. It's just a formality." When he walked out, I sank into the chair, my hands trembling. My son, the one I raised alone, was taking me to court. Not for money, not for land, but for disturbing their privacy. That night, as I sat alone in the house I built, I realized something had shattered beyond repair. It wasn't just love. It was trust, the very foundation of a mother's world. And though I didn't know it yet, that betrayal would awaken something inside me. Something stronger than pain, sharper than grief. The will to fight back. The envelope arrived on a cold Monday morning, sealed in crisp white paper and stamped with the bold letters "Civil Summons." My trembling hands tore it open as my heart pounded like a drum. The words blurred before my eyes. Plaintiff, Ethan Collins. Defendant, Margaret Collins. Charge, disturbance of privacy, emotional interference, and refusal to vacate shared property. For a long time I couldn't move. My son's name, my own blood, printed against mine like strangers on opposite sides of a battlefield. My knees weakened, and I sank into the chair beside the window, the morning light spilling over the paper like a cruel spotlight on my shame. All my life, I had faced hardship, poverty, widowhood, loneliness, but nothing hurt like this betrayal. I could almost hear my husband's voice whispering, "Our boy would never turn against you, Margaret." But he had. By noon, the whole neighborhood knew. People who once greeted me with smiles now crossed the street to avoid me. At the grocery store, I heard whispers. Did you hear? Her son's taking her to court. I forced a polite smile and walked past them, pretending their pity didn't sting. That evening, I found Sophie in the living room, her legs crossed elegantly, a faint smile playing on her lips. Oh, she said sweetly. I see you got the notice. I stood frozen, the paper still in my hand. You knew about this? She shrugged. Ethan and I talked about it for weeks. You don't seem to understand boundaries. We're a married couple, Margaret. We need privacy. Privacy, I repeated, my voice breaking. In my own house. Her smile sharpened. It's our home now too. But don't worry, the court will decide what's fair. She left the room humming softly, as if she hadn't just stabbed me in the heart. I sat there in silence, the words echoing through the empty house. The court will decide. That night, I cried like I hadn't in years. Not for losing the case, I hadn't even gone to court yet, but for losing the little boy who used to hug me goodnight and whisper, "I'll take care of you forever, Mom." The next morning, my old friend Daniel Harper came to visit. Daniel had been a lawyer for over 30 years, and though retired, he still carried the calm confidence of a man who knew the law and life. He sat beside me, reading the papers carefully. After a few moments, he looked up, his expression hard. Margaret, this isn't just about privacy. They're trying to push you out. Look here. Shared property? He tapped the document. Did you ever transfer the house to Ethan? No, I said quietly. It's still under my name. I paid every mortgage payment myself. I only added him as an emergency contact. A faint smile crossed Daniel's face. Then they've made a mistake, a big one. I frowned. What do you mean? He leaned forward. Legally, you're the sole owner. They're suing you for disturbing privacy in a house that doesn't even belong to them. The judge won't take this kindly. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. A tiny, trembling light inside the darkness. Over the next few days, Daniel helped me prepare. We gathered every document. The house deed, tax receipts, electricity bills, and even old letters showing I paid for everything. Each paper felt like a weapon, not of vengeance, but of truth. Meanwhile, Ethan avoided me. He barely looked me in the eye, as though guilt was too heavy to carry. I wanted to reach out, to tell him we could still fix this, but Sophie stood between us like a wall of ice. When the court date arrived, I stood before the mirror, adjusting my simple blue dress. My reflection looked older than I remembered, but there was something new in my eyes, a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You ready, Margaret? I nodded. Yes. I've fought all my life for him. Now I'll fight for myself. As we walked out the door, I glanced back at the house I built, the one my son now claimed was his prison. I whispered softly, "You're still mine." And for the first time in months, I smiled. The battle had begun, not out of bitterness, but out of love twisted into something stronger. The resolve to make the truth speak for itself. The morning of the hearing felt heavy with gray clouds, as though even the sky mourned what was about to unfold. I stood outside the courthouse, clutching my worn handbag against my chest. My knees ached, but my heart hurt worse. My son, my only child, was somewhere inside, waiting to face me not as family but as an opponent. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low whispers. Reporters weren't there, but half the town might as well have been. I could feel their eyes on me. Pity mixed with curiosity. Daniel walked beside me, steady and calm, a small stack of neatly organized documents in his hand. When I entered, I saw Ethan sitting at the plaintiff's table. He wouldn't look at me. Sophie sat next to him, her lips pursed in mock grief, her hand resting possessively on his arm. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize my son. The man who used to laugh so easily, who used to hold my hand when crossing the street as a boy. Now his face was cold, guarded, and distant. The judge entered, and silence fell. The trial began. Ethan's lawyer stood first, a young man with slicked back hair and a voice like oil. Your Honor, he began, my client and his wife have been subjected to ongoing emotional stress, invasion of privacy, and mental disturbance due to Mrs. Collins' constant interference in their marital life. Each word landed like a blow. I gripped my shawl tightly, my chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She has entered their private room without consent, the lawyer continued, commented on personal matters, and refused to give the couple reasonable privacy. My client seeks legal protection and rightful claim to shared residence. The judge turned to Ethan. Is that true, Mr. Collins? Ethan nodded slowly. Yes, Your Honor. We just want peace in our home. Peace. That word stabbed deeper than any insult. The home I built with decades of labor was now the battlefield for my son's so-called peace. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stood up, calm but firm, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Margaret Collins, is 75 years old. She's not an intruder. She's the owner of the property in question. I have here the original deed, tax receipts, and proof of continuous payment, all in her name. The plaintiff and his wife live rent-free, without any legal or financial contribution. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Sophie's smile faltered, her confidence cracking for the first time. Ethan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Daniel placed the documents on the judge's desk. Furthermore, he continued, this case is not about privacy, it's about greed. The plaintiff seeks to remove the rightful homeowner to gain possession of her property. It's a cruel attempt to disguise selfishness as a legal grievance. When the judge nodded for me to speak, I rose slowly. My legs trembled, but my voice, though soft, carried the weight of 75 years of love, pain, and endurance. Your Honor, I began. I raised my son in that house. I worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and sold my jewelry to give him a better life. I gave him my heart, my time, my everything. When he married, I gave him the best room, the biggest space, and all the freedom I could offer. My throat tightened. But I never disturbed his privacy. I only tried to be a mother, to cook his favorite meals, to keep him company when he was sick, to remind him that he's loved. Ethan finally looked at me then, his eyes glistening with guilt, but he said nothing. Sophie's jaw clenched. I turned toward them both. I didn't disturb your privacy, I said quietly. I disturbed your greed. And that's what this is really about. A hush filled the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, studying me. Daniel placed a comforting hand on my arm as I sat back down. My body trembled, but my heart felt strangely steady. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. For several minutes, the room was still except for the rustling of papers. Then he looked up, his gaze moving from Ethan to Sophie, and finally to me. I've heard enough, he said. We will reconvene tomorrow for my decision. As I stood to leave, I glanced once more at my son. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not defiance, but shame. And as I walked out of the courtroom, I realized that win or lose, I had already regained something precious, my voice. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. The same cold marble floors, the same hushed murmurs, but this time, I wasn't afraid. I'd already faced the worst pain a mother could endure. Her child's betrayal. Whatever came next could no longer break me. Daniel and I sat quietly at the defense table. My hands rested calmly on my lap, the faint tremor in them more from age than fear. Across the room, Ethan sat beside Sophie. His face looked tired, pale even. He didn't glance at me, but I noticed how his fingers fidgeted restlessly. Sophie whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The air grew thick with anticipation. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and began to speak in a tone that carried both authority and disappointment. This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony regarding the case of Ethan Collins versus Margaret Collins. The claims made by the plaintiff allege disturbance of privacy, emotional interference, and refusal to vacate a shared home. However, upon examination of the property deed, financial statements, and historical ownership records, it is evident that the house in question legally and solely belongs to Mrs. Collins. A murmur spread through the room. I could feel eyes turning toward me, some shocked, some sympathetic. The judge raised a hand, commanding silence before continuing. Therefore, this court finds no merit in the plaintiff's case. The charge of privacy disturbance is dismissed with prejudice. My heart skipped a beat. Dismissed. Just like that. But the judge wasn't done. His gaze shifted to Ethan, his tone deepening. Mr. Collins, I have been a judge for many years, and I've presided over countless family disputes. Yet few have saddened me as much as this one. You brought your own mother to court, accusing her of violating your peace in a home she built for you. That is not privacy you sought, it is possession. Ethan's head dropped. Sophie shifted uncomfortably, biting her lip. The judge continued, his words striking like thunder. From this day forward, Mrs. Collins retains full ownership of her home and may determine who lives there. If the plaintiff and his spouse wish for privacy, they are free to seek it elsewhere, at their own expense. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt my chest rise and fall, a strange lightness filling me, like the first breath after years underwater. The judge gave one final glance toward me and said gently, Mrs. Collins, I hope peace returns to your home. Court adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. I stood, legs trembling, not from weakness but from the weight of the moment. Ethan still wouldn't look at me. Sophie's expression had curdled from smugness to fury, her perfectly painted lips pressed into a hard line. As Daniel gathered our papers, I turned toward them both. Ethan, I said softly. He flinched, finally raising his eyes. You took me to court to silence me. But you see, it wasn't the judge who silenced you today. It was your own conscience. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time I saw my son, the boy he once was, buried deep beneath years of manipulation and pride. I wanted to reach out, to forgive him. But some wounds needed time. That evening, I returned home. The air felt cleaner somehow. The same walls that had once echoed with tension now seemed to breathe again. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture, the photographs, the windows I'd cleaned for decades. Each corner whispered memories of love, of struggle, of survival. Later that night, a car pulled up outside. Ethan and Sophie stood at the gate, their suitcases beside them. They didn't speak. Sophie looked furious. Ethan looked hollow. I stepped onto the porch, my keys in hand. You don't have to leave tonight, I said quietly. But you can't stay here anymore. I need my peace now. Sophie muttered something under her breath and dragged her suitcase down the street. Ethan lingered, eyes filled with unshed tears. Mom, he began. I shook my head gently. No. Ethan. Go find your peace. I found mine. Then I turned the key, locking the door behind me. As I sat by the window that night, sipping my tea, the moonlight washed over the garden. The roses I'd planted years ago swayed in the wind, soft and alive. The house was quiet, truly quiet, for the first time in years. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Richard. We did it." Because revenge, I realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it was silent, graceful, served with the dignity of truth. And as the night settled around me, I smiled, knowing that silence had finally become my sweetest justice.